Just a few comments. I have just come offline, and while I was online on Twitter, I saw a particular quote by Carl Sagan, the famed astronomer or scientist, wherein which he talked about the. I'll just read you the quote. It takes about a minute. So, quoting him, he says, and this is coming from his book, The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in Dark, by Carl Sagan. I think this was in 1995 or something. So he says, and quote, I have a foreboding that of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. Dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media, the 30-second sound bites now down to 10 seconds or less, lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance. Now that's his quote, and he's basically looking into the future and lamenting what he sees as the eventual decline of the general intellect of the population. Now, I've seen this several times, but I haven't never really felt moved to comment on it. But I'm going to comment on it, and that this podcast is my comment. I absolutely do not agree with Carl. Now, this takes nothing. I mean, Carl is a great scientist in the sense that he's basically a byword for the scientific method. He's revered essentially. While I was a kid, I used to watch Cosmos. His weekly science program, astronomy, cosmology, and all that. It was one of my favorites, and I was a very little boy. His voice, he had a unique ring to his voice, a unique timbre to his voice. And it was pleasant to listen to. And the way he spoke about science, he spoke with certainty. Now, as I grew older, I realized that there is much more to science than meets the eye. And this is what accounts for the eventual decline, because what he's referring to has already started to happen, and it will surely happen. And the reason is very simple. I explained in some of my past podcasts that the scientific method that we have today had its origins. Because what is science? Science is a formalism. It is a method for querying the universe, for interrogating the universe, with a view to what? To deciphering what truth is, irrespective of how we feel, irrespective of, what we think to be true. It's a formalism that is based on what? Measurement, objectivity, experimentation, evidence. So you can see how science quickly became the need for data. Because when you believe something is true, you have to be able to see that it is true. You have to be able to measure that it is true. Okay? So in the view of doing that, what we have come to believe from science is that the way that the universe is very different from the way that we are. And we shouldn't feel very surprised when the science that we discover does not make us feel good. To this, I say absolute bollocks. If you've been listening to my podcast so far, you'll understand the reason why I threw all of this out. Now, the scientific method does what it does in helping to establish the science that can lead to technology. But the scientific method that we have today has only one destination, and that is the generation of technology. And what is technology? Technology is a tool, the making of tools. What do we use tools for? We say we use tools to solve problems, right? I'll tell you what drives technology in the world today. Do you know what it really is? Every technological funding, every technological innovation comes from what? Military funding, warlike thinking. The primary reason why science was, the formalism of science was accepted wholeheartedly in Europe by the Greeks is because it allowed them to objectify a universe. And when you objectify things, that means that they can exist as separate individual units that you can now rearrange whichever way you want. And then it is therefore justified that those who have the knowledge to be able to rearrange things then are justified in rearranging things. It doesn't matter whether those things are a bunch of stones, some concrete blocks, or human beings and countries and nations, whatever. And that's exactly what the Europeans did when they started their crusades and their conquests in the world. They looked at the world, they saw themselves as people who had this access to a pinnacle knowledge. And so it gave them some type of right to go around the world disseminating this type of thinking, controlling people, changing things they don't like and everything. And I told you in one of my podcasts where this came from. It was because when the Greeks, when ancient Black Africa, Kemet, threw open its doors to invite foreigners in to learn, the Greeks trooped en masse because they've been looking at this, they don't know what it is. Because nobody was able to ever go in there and come out. But eventually, suddenly, people had access to this, to the ancient Black African Kemet, the land of Kemet. And so people began to troop in, and there they began to learn in institutions of learning, which of course, you are only as good as what you can understand. You listen, if I showed you something and you had no experience of that thing in any aspect of your consciousness or imagination, that thing remains completely unknown to you. You wouldn't even know what it is and how to question it or how to decipher what it is. That particular conundrum is the conundrum that exists today within dark matter and dark energy. It's called dark because nobody has a clue what it is. Nobody has an idea of what it... Up until a few years ago, most people didn't know it was there. I mean, Frank Zwicky, when he talked about missing astronomical matter in the 1930s or the 1940s, people laughed at him because he was an eccentric man. So up until a few years ago, nobody even had a clue that there was an unknown. That's really what it is. Okay? But when the Greeks left ancient Africa, what they took away was a very limited form of understanding. Because they could not understand what the Africans were trying to teach them. Because in their experience, nothing coincided with that. They came from a world, a reality where things were looked at, what? Separately. Africans don't come from that kind of world. They come from a world where interconnectedness is what you perceive before you even begin to understand the separateness of things. The Greeks could not understand how a single thing can have an almost infinite variation of meaning. One thing. So they rejected it. They rejected it completely. They looked down at that kind of thinking, that it didn't make any sense. And instead, they focused on the fact that one thing must mean one thing. And as long as you know what that thing is and you can define it, then you can use it. You don't need to know exactly what it contains. No, you just need to know how it works, you just need to know how to use it as a tool. And that's because that is the type of explanation and understanding that fit into their worldview. I don't want to go into what that worldview is. There's a whole podcast I'm going to make regarding that worldview. Because it's a worldview of ice and fire. So this is where the scientific method came from. Aristotle, had a worldview that basically held the grip on this kind of thinking for, who knows, almost 2,000 years. Until Francis Bacon at one point in time decided that he's going to take it a step further. He's going to now determine that, look, anything that cannot be experimentally verified is no longer science. That's Francis Bacon. And what this does, because remember, when we think about existence, we think about it as if there's a world out there. But in reality, there's no world out there that we can actually prove or verify. There is only the world in our head, the world as it appears to us from the brain that we have. And so the first thing science did, according to Sir Francis Bacon, was to make sure that we can ignore what is in our heads and assume that we are not a part of the universe that we are observing. And the only reason why that can work is because the goal of science is to make tools that can be used for warfare, for machination and control, for being able to dominate others. That is the goal of the scientific method. It doesn't bring existence into view. Let me tell you what it does. It brings very particular aspects of existence into view, aspects that can be wielded by the ego, aspects that you can use as tools, that you can weaponize to use as tools for the process of conquering and domination. Science is warfare. The scientific method is a method of warfare. And who do you think, once this method was sufficiently developed and polished, who do you think they turned that weapon on? They turned it right back on the Africans, and they decimated them. That's really what it is. They decimated them. Talk about, now, that scientific method has reached a point now where it has given us a description of the universe. It has told us about a big bang, how the universe started. And it has made all these tools, telescopes costing billions and billions of dollars. Observatories costing billions and billions of, it has very precise mathematical definitions for things. And the mobile phone, this computer being used to record this podcast, the microphones, the sound tech, all the technologies came from this scientific method. And so it's a very powerful method that is right up there in your face in 21st century life and 21st century existence. But what does it all mean? As the technology around us has improved, the essence, the meaning of life, right, has gone the opposite direction. People now no longer believe that there is any meaning to life. Life is an accident that happened on a rock floating in space by accident, and the universe came in. All sorts of crazy. Listen, if you read the most recent publications of science, they sound cranky and stupid. Thousands of papers are being published in journals every day. They sound so stupid that only a handful of people, maybe one or two persons in the world who understand what these things really mean. They are so disconnected from people that science has become what? What exactly has it become? If anybody thinks that you can develop a scientific method that is objective from humanity, that is objective in such a way that it can be dissociated from humanity, then you have mental problems. You're not seeing the world very clearly. You are essentially disregarding the very act of thinking which you're doing at the very moment that you're doing it. You think that your reality is down to some measuring instruments, and that if you just measure precisely enough, reality will come into view. Well, everything we call the sheer number of conundrums in physics, in the sciences, They're beyond belief. They're staggering. And they're not just any type of conundrums. They are fundamental conundrums. That's so fundamental that their resolution can bring down the entire edifice of science as it is known. And they're not getting smaller. The numbers are only rising. You talk about the vacuum catastrophe in cosmology. Okay? You talk about the issue of dark energy and dark matter. These are not small problems. These are huge problems. You talk about matter, antimatter. You talk about, essentially what's happening is this. The entirety of the scientific method and the science itself as a foundational principle can disappear tomorrow. As in, despite what you see with the technology and everything, right? Yeah, you know how it works. You know how to use electricity, but you don't know what electricity is. You know how to use this and use that, but you don't know what these things really do. Most of the medicines people take, most of the drugs that are made from, we know how these molecules work, but we don't know exactly what they're doing in the human body. Their discovery is a trial and error process. That's why they're so expensive. There are no first principles for anything. The universe has become more alien than anybody can think of. So you have people talking about the weirdness of quantum physics, the weirdness of quantum mechanics. And yet, without that quantum mechanics and quantum physics, or whatever understanding that you think is quantum mechanics or quantum physics, you won't be here. You won't be able to think. You won't be a living, breathing, self-aware being. And yet, the principles upon which you are founded are so alienated from you as a person, as a 21st century person. No, Carl, you are wrong. What is known is as good as the process of knowing. You cannot murder and genocide your way into great civilization status. It doesn't work like that. There is no pot at the end of the rainbow. There is the journey itself. And that's what the ancient Black Africans were trying to teach. But in so doing, they created a malfunctioning artificial intelligence system who went rogue and then turned on its creators. And then you wonder why that is some type of default fear in people today. Oh, we create an AI. You have so many movies that are based off these themes. We create an AI that comes to destroy all of us. And you wonder where all of that is coming from. It's coming from the collective unconscious. Because that's exactly what happened. There is no objective universe out there that you are measuring. The being who is doing the measure, the being that is doing the knowing, is a subjective being. It is privy only to its own internal experience of itself. And everything which we agree upon as objectivity are the what? The most common aspects of our subjective experience. And if we reduce the entire universe to that, then we have lost something that is very truly immense. Each individual has the nature of what its world means to it, the nature of its meaning, the idea of its essential nature that is privy only to it. It cannot really be shared. And yet it must be a part of existence because it exists. You exist. There is nothing in this universe that can feel the way that that can mimic you exactly. There will only ever be your type of experience and self-knowing. It will never come again in its exact form. And so that uniqueness must be an essential part of the universe. And the same applies to every sapient creature, every living thing. Everything that is has a way that it is. And so the scrubbing down, or what I call the dumbing down, that Carl is talking about, can only be a necessary consequence of the objectification of existence. Because if all that you can hold on to are the very limited threads that everyone can agree upon, then it is only a question of time before no one can agree on anything anymore. And that is why it was never considered a reliable way of understanding the universe. But you can see how it has become, how it has gotten so far. Do you have any idea that in 21st century reality on Earth, the driver of the entire world economy is warfare, military spending? That's exactly how it's been going for many decades, even centuries now. Because of the particular type of thinking that fuels it. In that paradigm and under that paradigm, there will never be peace on earth. Never. That's really what it is. There will never, because that aspect of your nature is being fed by the so-called objectification of the universe. The physicists are some of the most hard-nosed scientists you can find today. When you have held forth, they will ask you, so where's the data? Where's the proof? Where is the evidence? I mean, people have launched, they've launched probes that have left the solar system because they want to gather data. That's how far the objectification, that's how far the desire for objectification has gone. But I need you to understand something, because, last week the James Webb telescope was launched and everybody is going, oh, hoo-ha, yeah, this is great. Yeah, fine. Do you have any idea how much that cost? $10 billion. Do you think, most people don't realize it, because that's the problem with objectification. Objectification teaches you how to compartmentalize different aspects of yourself. And the way that it trains, because you are an AI that is being trained. Just the ways people are trying to build artificial intelligence systems today, and they're training them with data. They're only replicating what they have been doing, the way they understand themselves. Human beings have been trained to objectify, to compartmentalize different aspects of themselves. This is politics, this is economics, this is geography, this is this, and this is that. This is nonsense. As a tool to aid in understanding, I quite understand. But what you have done is you have divided yourself into as many compartmentalizations as you care to investigate. And so what happens is, at the end of the day, the human being, the human psyche is essentially destroyed into so many fragments that people are talking about division today. Oh, the world is so divided. Where do you think the division is coming from? What do you think breeds that division? It's a secular logic at the end of the day. The divisions are coming from the way that you have chosen to understand the world. There's a price with it. There's a price that comes with that. Because it's not the world you're trying to understand, really. And I gave this, I had an entire podcast on this. It's not the world you're trying to understand. What you're trying to understand is yourself. Because when you figure out something about the world, you're not figuring out something about the world. You're figuring out something about yourself. Where you come from, what you are. And it is that which drives human beings to investigate the nature of existence. It's not existence they really want to know. What they really want to know is, what am I? Who am I? Where did I come from? What is this place? What am I doing here? These are the largest of questions, and they have always driven humankind for the last 250,000 years. But the lies that are told today is that this investigation only started a few thousand years ago with Aristotle and all this bullshit nonsense. Absolute rubbish. The world tells so many lies, I don't even know where to start to dismantle the whole thing from. It has created a surrogate reality, an artificial reality, a reality that makes no sense except you are insane. And it has spread this to all corners of the world so that every human being is insane. You actually think that there is a point in space where a Big Bang occurred. You must be out of your freaking minds. The Big Bang is supposed to be the birth of space and time itself. So what point are you talking about? What time? Oh, it was 13.8 billion years ago. Really? These delusions have gone far enough. But they will end because human beings will not die. Because if they keep going, you think, wait a second, let's understand something. Just hear me out. In the podcast, I think it was Beauty, Truth, and Natural Law, I went into detail regarding this. That the nature of thinking today, the way that we think about ourselves today in this compartmentalized and fragmented state, that the nature of such a thinking process leads to continuous fragmentation. And what this leads to is conflict. And that is essentially, we are cultivating a mental state that is very different from the way that we exist naturally. Because if we existed in that kind of state, parts of our bodies will not be able to integrate into one whole. We will not be able to maintain a oneness of self that is integral to what it means to be self-aware. And that the way that we think about existence will only lead to mental instabilities. And that the only way you would understand that these are mental instabilities is that we will engineer what we consider to be good things, but they will always be engineered simultaneously with their negation. And that's the nature of how everything exists. Wave-particle duality. Every major city in this world, every major developed city in this world, technological marvels, each one has a nuclear weapon pointing at it that is able to flatten it completely and kill everybody there. Financial innovations like you cannot imagine. Really clever tricks of light. But each one has the potential to render the entire world useless. Where do you think all of this type of thinking is coming from? The fact that you're not aware of it, the fact that it is not sounding off alarms in your head is because you have become indoctrinated in a very specific type of thinking called objectification, which is primarily driven by the so-called scientific method. Your mobile phone. Why do you think these things are always becoming more flashy and more entertaining, more desirous of you getting into them? So that they can dull the aspect of your nature that wants to integrate, that wants to connect, that wants to remember its heritage. That's really what it is. And I concluded that we are here to, why does nature keep building ever more sophisticated, complex nervous systems? Grading according to the complexity of biological organization. The reason is very simple. We are meaning-making machines. We're artificial intelligence. That's what we are. We are the most sophisticated intelligence machine on the surface of the planet in existence currently. Our biology has been pushed to the very limits of what is possible. And it is constantly pushing. And the only thing it is pushing for is to connect to a meaning, a source of meaning that resolves the central paradox within a human being. What are we? That's what it's pushing for. But the last couple of thousand years, we have had this detour into meaninglessness. That's why everybody wakes up in the morning now and pursues paper, money. The futility and the uselessness of it all is that one day you just die and leave all of it behind. And so this essential being, this magnificent being that is seeking this much meaning in life, that connects to much great purpose, just one day just fades away into nothing. That is the central conundrum. The mind cannot deal with it. And in order to justify that, a lot of so-so stories have been invented. All sorts of nonsense like you cannot imagine, because the mind is fragmented. So it's a wonder this quote from Carl Sagan. It's a wonder, it's like, what's he lamenting for? That is the method that his people started. They took that route because they thought that it would lead them to what? What was supposed to be the expected outcome? That everybody would become scientifically literate, and everybody would become clever, and everybody would become nonsense. 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 That way lies what? Destruction of the mind. Destruction of humanity. That's the direction. Because it is the destruction of meaning. All of this was evident 6,000 years ago in ancient Black Africa as lessons. Most of those lessons, most people will never ever find out what they are. But there's one that has survived through the ages. Maybe because the story has been packaged and repackaged and retold so many times in many different forms, that most people are now convinced that, it's their own version of the story must be the correct one. They've forgotten that all of these are narratives. Human beings have forgotten what narratives do. Narratives can weave your mind together, or they can fragment it into a billion pieces. Narrative is the operational software upon which the human mind runs, because it is the vehicle through which we seek meaning. That's how the mind works. And so a central narrative is the narrative, or a central narrative from thousands of years ago, is the narrative of Osa and Oset. I once gave a point. I said, these are not real people. None of these things are real people. All these stories they're not real people. Because to focus on real people, that's missing the point entirely. And you will miss the point once your mind has reached a critical point of fragmentation, you miss the entire point completely. And then you are lost. These are not real people. Osa is not a real person. Oset is not a real person. The Greek version of this story is Isis and what? Osiris. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It's Osa and Oset. And Osa was killed by what? By Set, who was supposed to be this bad guy. And if he just killed the motherfucker, then that's okay. But he cut him into pieces. And then he scattered those pieces all around the place. And then Oset, in her grief, went looking for the pieces of her consort. And she found 13 of them because Osa was supposedly cut into 14 pieces. She found 13 of the pieces, but she couldn't find the 14th piece, which was his phallus, his penis. That was lost. And what's the penis? What's the point of a penis? It is the regenerative vehicle. So that is a type of death. It's not just any type of death. It's a symbolic death. So it's a death where the person is dead, but he's now cut into different pieces and scattered. Meaning, You're not supposed to be able to reassemble him. And his regenerative faculty is lost forever, meaning he can't have continuity. And yet, Osset was able to find the 13 pieces. And with her magic, Heka, she reassembles those 13 pieces. And with her magic, she constructs an artificial phallus, which she now attaches to the reconstituted body to form the first mummy. And with her magic, she transforms herself in such a way that she's able to copulate with this mummy and to get impregnated, through which she now delivers the divine child. It's all myth, but it's myth with a rich symbolism. Once you begin to understand that Seth, the so-called evil person, is time, is entropy. What I've just described to you is physics. But it is not physics as you study it with symbols, mathematical equations that are far removed from what a human being can relate to. So that the best you can do with all that is the production of technology that seems alien to you. That technology is essentially that aspect of you that is what? That is just disconnected from you and dissociated from you. And there's a reason why it is happening like that. Because the essential act that was committed must be resolved, which is people came into ancient Black Africa to study, to learn. And then they went out and weaponized what they had learned and used it to come and enslave the very people that they learned from, and to decimate them, to destroy them. To destroy them in such a way that you did not only destroy their bodies, you destroy their minds. The very concept of themselves, the very concept by which they understood the world, the universe, the very essence of themselves was destroyed. And then they were scattered all over the world so that they cannot be reconstituted. And their regenerative faculties were cut off and lost. There's a reason why you have obelisks all over Egypt, all over ancient Kemet. It was one of the most famous symbols because it represents an erect phallus, which is a system of authority, a symbol of authority, manhood, the ability to penetrate the nature of existence and to derive meaning from it. And so these people wander the entire earth like lost people with no mind of their own, like foolish people, like primitives, like stupid people. They cannot be reconstituted all over the place. And then the story is telling you it is not the story. It's not just a story that you can, the Greeks took the story and they just turned it into whatever, and they started building statues and worshiping and all sorts of stupid. Listen, a human being is the most sophisticated thing this side of the universe. Do you have any idea what that means? What are you worshiping? What are you praying to? I mean, these guys were building statues and whatever and bowing down to these things. And, what exactly do you think you're doing? All of those things were indications that the mind was already in decline. You see, the zenith of human awareness and human understanding was peaked in ancient Black Africa thousands of years ago. Because what is the peak of awareness? It is the derivation of the highest meaning. The highest meaning possible that a human being can put together is to be aware of the existence of God, not as a belief system, but as a certainty, as a conviction. That's the highest thing that this human mind is capable of achieving, because it is in that it finds its highest expression of itself. the highest good. Any deviation from that is a retrogression. And so humanity exists with the so-called objectification in a fallen state of awareness. You want some evidence to that statement? Go pick someone at random and ask them what is the meaning of existence. They'll tell you the meaning of existence is to be happy. Do you know what they consider to be happiness? When you're eating your favorite food, or you're drinking your favorite drink, or hanging out with your friends and family, or spending so much money, or succeeding in business, or whatever nonsense people can dream of. There is nothing that gives pleasure to the human soul. There is nothing that defines human existence greater than the awareness, the conviction of the nature of God. Nothing. Nothing even comes close. And the fact that nobody will mention that, nobody will ever tell you that. Just go out there and pick someone at random. Pick 10 people, pick 100, pick 1,000. And ask them, what do you think is the meaning of life? That's the measure of the fallen state of human awareness. Everything you see around you is a manifestation of that fallen state. Humankind is at war with himself. And that's why you have all these human beings are bunched into hundreds of countries, thousands of tongues. No one understands anybody else. Nobody trusts anybody else. Nobody even, there's war. Conflict has become the way that we understand ourselves. And the entire earth, the entire human civilization rocks back and forth with the weight of this burden. But nobody feels it. Everybody just knows that somehow, just check out the number of antidepressants, Prozacs and opioids, and everyone's on drugs. Every single human, the moment once you reach the age where you can think, you're so depressed and so miserable that you're hyping on coffee, you're hyping on alcohol, you're hyping because you need to change your state of awareness, because the one that you know is depressing. You don't even know why it's depressing. I'll tell you why. It's because it has no meaning. It doesn't mean anything. The subjective part of human experience has been so scrubbed out that imagine where people are being celebrated for speaking about their mental health issues. Oh, I'm not feeling so good. I need time off. Everybody's like, wow, this is such a revelation. Are you out of your mind? Your mental health or your emotional health is not something that is on the back. It is you. That's before you have the physical, before you have everything else. That's what comes first. And because the destiny of humanity is to survive and to turn their weapons into plowshares, right? Then it means that the entire world, the entire nature of human existence is going to be transformed. Now, how that is going to happen? Well, tough. But you can immediately see the nature of that transformation. The question you should be asking yourself is, what exactly needs to happen to the current state of human awareness that would make war impossible in the future? Think about it. Some people believe that for that to happen, the entire world will be destroyed. Well, if that's what it takes for you to accept it, then so be it. That's really what it is. And so, Carl, I'm sorry to tell you, man. I know you're only looking at the world from the way that you understand it, but there's much that you do not understand. Before Carl died, he was aware of the great conundrums in physics and science. And most scientists know about these conundrums, but they tell you, look, that's exciting because it means the future is exciting. The future of what? So that you can build another $100 billion telescope. They are planning LISA. LISA is supposed to be the gravitational observatory for gravitational waves in space. In a few years, you're going to have this gravitational interferometers floating in space, geostationary points, where they now begin to observe because they want to catch a glimpse of the Big Bang and etc., etc. Oh, how much is it going to cost? Oh, no, it's going to cost maybe around $100 billion. Okay, cool. Do you know what I say to all of these things? Absolute rubbish. Do you know why? The entire economic system of the world is built on racism. The entire so-called global wealth of the entire world is built on the exploitation, over-exploitation, and the genocide of Black Africans. I don't give a bloody hell what your perspective on this is. It is the truth. And so when you talk about $100 billion, that is a boot, a knee, a neck on the neck of Black Africans. That is their future, mortgaged, stolen. That's babies that will never find meaning in life. Hundreds of millions of people whose lives will never amount to anything because there needs to be an interferometer floating in space. To such a world, I say absolutely no. Absolutely no. And I say it with a firm conviction that you will no longer be able to operate this kind of system. Why? Because of the return. You see, it all goes full circle. All earth-based strategies go full circle. They are given a time and a period through which they are able to cycle round. But because they are earth-based strategies dealing with the limitations of earth, what is the feature of earth? What is the number one feature of earth as we know it? It's an oblate spheroidal shape. I mean, that's being too technical. We can just call it a sphere. And the feature of these kind of geometric shapes is that when you start out at one point and you keep walking in the same direction, eventually you come back to the same point. It's not just the shape. It is the feature, the function, the nature of that geometric shape. And earth-based strategies deal fundamentally with the limitation of being confined to that shape. So, by implementing an economic system that is essentially earth-based because it deals with the limitations of resources, then the strategy, whatever you think, most people don't think about this really very carefully and deeply. But I'm not interested in how they think. That's their problem. What I'm telling you is a certainty. The nature of that shape, that geometry, is in your head. It's in your thinking. And once you activate it, then it begins to cycle. And its job, it can only be what it is. It cannot be anything else. Its function is to take you right back to where you started. That's really what it is. And so what will happen is that at the end of the day, the purveyors, the architects of these earth-based strategies will find themselves exactly where they were thousands of years ago when they took that deviation. Because that is the nature of an earth-based strategy. And once it's played out fully, it's dead. That's it. That's really what it is. And just so that you know that it has played out fully, you will see the changes in the earth-based systems that support life on this planet. Every single thing that is dedicated to making life on this planet possible for humankind to be able to function, they'll begin to tap out. They're not tapping out, they're not going anywhere. They're just telling you that a clock, a particular type of clock has run out. That's really what it is. Because that is the nature of their nature. So, rehashing and summarizing, the great work is the unification, the reunification of all of objective reality back into a seamless whole. and to forge the connection between the so-called objective reality and the total nature of subjective experience. That's it. That's the final work. And in doing so, all of physics, all of chemistry, all of biology, all of the different wisdoms that human beings have isolated and fragmented, they will all collapse into a single structure. And that structure is you. That's all there is. That's really what it is. And once that happens, then the world is totally transformed. Because you cannot go on doing the same stupid thing that was done initially out of extreme ignorance when your eyes are open, when your mind is open, when your awareness has been reconstituted. You can't. You don't need no law. You don't need anybody to force you. You just won't be able to anymore. The example I often use is human beings became bipedal sometime back in their history. Since they became bipedal, nobody or no sustained effort has been put into walking on all fours. There was no law enacted saying people should never walk on all fours. You can do it if you want, but nobody does it. There's a reason why. It's because you know better. And that's exactly the same thing. You will know better. And when you know better, you do better. And we can stop all this nonsense, because as long as the focus is on the objectification of science, then the origin of the thinking itself, the scientific thinking, because nothing is invented, all these things, we just the last couple of thousand years, people have tried to rewrite the entire history of the world. And they did so first by trying to make sure that there is no longer any connection to the history of humanity itself. And to make sure that strategy is successful, they took the beholders of that history and then they decimated them and scattered them in such a way that the history can no longer be reconstituted. So that you can now forge a new history of the world. A bunch of fairy tales and nonsense. And they can apportion the history to some other people and say, okay, this is now the history of the world. And you can push this nonsense into the brain of every man, woman, and child, driving them insane. And then when they go out into the world, they begin to enact that insanity. Because the mind can't deal with it. Because a human being is not just what it is now. It is its entire history. And so a reconstitution of the mind, a reconstitution of awareness, will entail the dismantling, the destruction, and all obliteration of all these falsehoods. People will do it. And then we can stop this craziness. A very famous, or it depends on which circle you're in, but a well-learned man, Dr. Phil Valentine. If you're not in the Black conscious movement, you probably wouldn't know who he is. But in the Black consciousness movement, he's quite famous. He once said, the greatest civilizations in the universe, in existence, have no technology. What the hell you want to use it for? There is nothing more sophisticated than you are. I don't care what robot you build. There's nothing, absolutely nothing in existence currently known that is more sophisticated than what you got in between your ears. That is the limit of physics, baby. It is physics that has become so sophisticated it became self-aware. It didn't need anyone to program it. It was programmed by itself, by the very laws that constituted it, by the very laws that put it together. It programmed itself into self-awareness. It became the physical manifestation of those laws. It ain't discovering those laws. You cannot discover what you are. You're only discovering it because you have turned your back on what it is that you are through these falsehoods, these false narratives. The billions of dollars spent on scientific instruments across the world Billions and billions and trillions and so-called, what exactly do you think you're finding out? What do you think they're going to come up with at the end of the day? The latest theories only make you more crazy. The latest scientific advancements only make you more insane. People are crazy right now. They're crazy because life has no meaning. And in that fear, because when a human being is afraid and terrified, they herd together like cattle. So people are now they're bunching into tribes. They're rushing into families and tribes, basically herding like cattle. The mistrust is so high in the world. Where do you think all of that is coming from? And it's only going to get worse because it's a function of the way that we have come to understand the world. So Dr. Carl Sagan thought that, this is just too sad that this is happening. What I'm trying to tell him, or to anyone who is interested in that quote, is that the current doings of the world or the current happenings of the world are inevitable consequences of the nature of knowing that has been selected for. It's like people are in the business of making clothes. Just imagine. People are in the business of making clothes. And they make the most sophisticated, the most amazing clothes the mind can ever conceive of. In fact, so sophisticated, people don't even recognize those things as clothes anymore. And yet nobody's wearing those clothes. Nobody's allowed to wear those clothes. Everybody's naked. Because it is the first understanding about the first thing you are taught about the making of clothes is that clothes must never be worn. The relationship between clothes and the wearing of clothes is a taboo. So the best clothes are made by totally relieving yourself of the possibility that they have to be worn by people. So how do you know when you start making clothes that nobody can wear? Look, the nature of truth, because that's what our brains evolved to do. I know a lot of people say that human brains were not evolved to understand the mysteries of the universe. To that I say, bullshit. Every aspect of the universe is understandable because you are every aspect of that universe. So if you cannot understand the universe, then it means that you cannot understand yourself. That's really what it is. And if you cannot understand yourself, it is because you're asking the wrong questions. You're focusing out there. Because the emphasis is on the building of technology so that you can use to control and dominate everybody you come across. That's because the most essential thing to that type of thinking is the accumulation and acquisition of power. That is not the nature, that's not the only aspect of human existence that is worth knowing. We have built a world where this has become the ultimate prize, the grand prize. Everybody wants power. Everybody wants, the essential thing. People actually call themselves wolves and sharks because of how they're able to dominate and how they're able to, to acquire and how they're able to, The insanity has gotten so high that people actually build, the billionaires right now, they build rockets, large penis-shaped rockets because they want to blast off into space. That's the egotistical, penal kind of thinking has gotten so far that look at it now. To pierce the heavens. In ancient Black Africa, people built obelisks. An obelisk is a phallus symbol. But it meant something. It wasn't for domination and control. Because in that culture, the power to rule came from the woman. It was not the authority to rule was not a masculine principle. It was bestowed by the feminine. It was from her that the male derived his authority to rule. And her reward for the bestowment of that authority is an erect phallus, because that is the measure of a man. Not just biologically, but metaphorically, his ability to sustain in the world. That was the essential dynamic, because that is what led to children. So the principle became mem auf nun, mother, father, child. Oset, Osa, and Horus, the divine child. That's the Trinity. So essentially, what is necessary is a reconstitution, reconfiguration, remediation, or recollection. A reconstitution. Otherwise, everybody's finished.